Well done, Disney, you've done it again! So, just recently, I went to go see Disney's Lilo & Stitch, the live-action remake of the 2002 original. The original Lilo & Stitch is, in my opinion, one of Disney's all-time greatest artistic achievements, showing so much depth with what it tackles. The original dives into so many things, such as finding a found family as opposed to your biological family. It even dives into deeper issues like over-tourism in Hawaii and discusses what is really good for the economy and what's ruining the environment.
Terrorists, prepare to die! If you lived here, you'd understand.
And a lot of it is just very existentialist too, pondering what your place is in the world and why you exist in the first place. So what does this new remake from Disney decide to do with this original masterpiece? Have Stitch fart in a punch bowl. Yep, this is real.
That's like a superpower. The only superpower that I have is sometimes when I run too fast, I fart.
Inevitably, this remake of the original Lilo & Stitch completely misses the magic of the original and also sands off a lot of the rougher edges that the original had, making this one feel a lot more safe and bland in comparison to the original, with also some majorly confusing, strange story changes going on here, which we'll get into, believe me. Obviously, with any Disney live-action remake, it's very safe to assume there'll be a hollow, shallow image of the original simply existing there for nostalgia. I actually wasn't going to review this movie initially because of that, because I didn't really think it was worthwhile. However, upon thinking about it, I did decide to, because Lilo & Stitch is one of Disney's only fully original animated films they've ever made. Lilo & Stitch wasn't based on any existing fairy tale or folklore, and was simply an original story loosely inspired by both Dumbo and also E.T. It really has such a distinct image that makes it stand out on its own. And I remember when the original was coming out, Disney really treated it as such, choosing to promote Stitch as sort of an anti-hero even, with a lot of commercials airing that featured him crashing into other Disney movies and ruining them.
Oh, Bobby. Oh, Bobby. You get your own movie.
Obviously, this is very of the time, being the 2000s, but this movie really does hold up still. And in the entire Disney pantheon, it really does stand alone as its own unique thing. So now that it's been lumped into all the other Disney live-action remakes, I think it's important to highlight what makes the original work and where this remake stumbles in hindsight. So today, I'm going to be looking at the live-action Lilo & Stitch remake and compare it specifically to the original film it's based on and talk about what works and what really doesn't work, cause oh boy, there's a lot of that. To start, let's look at the things I liked, because there were at least a few things I appreciated about this movie. One thing I did like about this was the actress they cast to play Lilo, since her voice almost sounds exactly like Lilo's voice from the original. It's actually kind of uncanny.
Look, David, I got a dog. David, I got a new dog.
I like that they kept the "he took the red one" line.
He took the red one.
Yeah, I guess that's about it. There's a lot of things this remake does wrong, especially when it comes to sanding down the rougher edges of the original, in my opinion. And it's weird to me because Disney made the original movie, but they seem so intent on sanding down that movie to make it more palatable almost, which doesn't make any sense to me. I think one key moment that actually really exemplifies this is when Stitch initially is introduced. Of course, he has all 6 limbs and his antenna, like he has in the start of the original movie. Then, of course, when he's trying to disguise himself as a dog to Lilo, he shrinks his limbs in and gets rid of the antenna so he looks slightly cuter. But however, by the film's end, he hasn't brought out his original chaotic form again. So when he's about to be arrested by the Grand Council, he actually is still in his cute, marketable form. Which, while this might seem relatively simple, I think is actually a huge problem. In the original, the reason why he's in his chaotic form at the end is because he doesn't feel like he has anything left to hide at that point. Lilo and Nani have taught him the importance of Ohana, and he's really made a change for the better. So he's not just a monstrosity disguised as a dog anymore, he's part of their Ohana. But in this remake, you only see him in his true chaotic form at the very beginning and never again afterward. Which, to be honest, I really think destroys any symbolism of the arc he goes on. But believe me, this is not the only thing they cut from the original film, not by a long shot. For some reason, this film also cut the fact that Lilo has a big obsession with Elvis, which I don't really know why this was cut at all. I think one of the most iconic traits of Lilo in the original film is the fact that she's obsessed with Elvis, even though she's a young girl and Elvis wouldn't have existed in her time at all. Elvis died long before she was born. So it's kind of a quirky and charming trait that she has, that she's hyperfixated on this long dead pop star, and also a reason a lot of people see Lilo as an autistic character. However, that entire part of her charm as a character is just gone here, and it really sucks. They don't even have Stitch in his Elvis costume until the very end of the film during the credits for some reason, which is really wild to me. I feel like that's an incredibly iconic shot from the original film too. Another scene that is totally nuked here, maybe because it was too emotionally impactful for people, is the one where Lilo's house is literally burning to the ground. And those fire trucks are approaching and Nani sees them and says, "Please don't turn left, please don't turn left."
Oh, don't turn left.
Like, that is such a good scene in the original and really succeeds at just filling the viewer with dread because they know what's gonna happen. But that's not even in here. There's no scene where Lilo reads Stitch the Ugly Duckling book, which was also wild to me, since that is such a crucial moment in Stitch's arc throughout the entire film and him reconsidering what he's doing and questioning why he exists. And I think you could argue that's the beginning of the turnaround for him in the original film, but that's not here. Can't have a book with ugly in its title in the movie, I guess. Wow, come on, Disney. Also, for some reason, Jumba and Plankley decide not to use real guns when trying to catch Stitch in this movie, which is just the E.T. special edition changes all over again when they change the guns to walkie-talkies in that movie. Instead, they now have portal guns so they can make funny portal jokes with them looping for infinity. Whee! How awesome! Was really worth lowering the stakes for that, guys. Good job. And speaking of Jumba and Plankley, since this is something that concerned a lot of people even before the film release, they don't even dress up in drag anymore. They just use like cloaking devices to make themselves look human, which honestly is just a really boring change in my opinion. I think in the original it was kind of funny seeing these aliens trying to disguise themselves as humans but really poorly. It was charming and simple. But obviously, since this is a live-action remake, if they just made the CGI aliens wear human clothing, it would look unnatural, and probably wouldn't gel with the rest of this film, so that's why they did it. Yet another case where animation actually has a big leg up on live-action, especially when trying to tell a story like this. Also, the whole joke with Plankley being tricked into thinking that Earth is a mosquito reserve is barely mentioned in this film at all. In the original, it's a running joke that the fact that the aliens can't attack humans because they think they're a food source for mosquitoes. But here, it's like brought up at the start and then never mentioned again. There's also no heart-wrenching scene of Lilo saying to Stitch, "Get away from me, you're not my family," after she's about to be taken away by social services. Cause I guess Disney thought that would be too emotional for people. And there's also no scene of Nani confronting Stitch and him telling her Ohana means family after revealing himself as an alien criminal. And there's no chase scene of him, Nani, Jumba, and Plankley going after Gontu in his ship after he's taken Lilo, cause guess what? There's no Gontu in this movie. Somehow, despite the fact that Gontu is in the original movie, the entire kicker of the climax there, Disney decided not to include him here. While I would argue that the original Lilo and Stitch doesn't really have a very clear antagonist, Gontu is about as close as you're gonna get to that, and he's also a big reason why the second half of the film is kicked off. But he doesn't appear at all in this film. I guess because Disney didn't want to spend extra money making a huge chase scene with a giant alien, huh? Go figure. So what exactly does that leave us with? With the majority of the things I just discussed that were actually subtracted from this film, it makes it very clear what the issue is with how Disney is treating the source material here. Where the original film was not afraid at all to get very real and very in your face with a lot of heavier stuff, most of that is sanded off here. And instead of being truly emotional, having a lot of depth to it like the original did, Disney is more focused on this being cute and safe and palatable, which very much defeats the point of the original. original. Even as I discussed before, the original film having some commentary on over-tourism in Hawaii, that's also erased here. In the original film, there's a white tourist who's always losing his ice cream as a running gag throughout the film. At the start of this film, Lilo goes and takes a picture of this tourist and then puts his picture next to a bunch of other pictures of other white tourists that she's taken pictures of. She has them all on this corkboard almost as a collection of the people that are coming in and, in her view, ruining her environment and culture. But here, the guy that always loses his ice cream is just another Hawaiian guy, which completely defeats the point. There's no commentary here at all because he's just another native, which is just another thing that Disney has standed off here. And speaking of which, that's a great segue into the controversy with Nani's actress, that being Sydney Ogidong. While Sydney definitely has the looks for Nani, since let's face it, Chris Sanders is all about them thick thighs, a big issue people have is that she's not actually a native Hawaiian. While she was born and raised in Hawaii, she's not full Hawaiian ethnicity, which does explain why her skin does appear a bit paler. And as a matter of fact, for this film and in the trailers used for this film, Disney had to make her skin look slightly more brown. They used CGI to do this, which, like, if they just cast an actual Hawaiian actress, this wouldn't be a problem. I don't know why this was something Disney just didn't do from the get-go. Now, Sydney totally is a good actress, but to be honest, I just don't really see her as Nani. I think there's actually a few moments in this film where she comes off as just kinda mean-spirited and not nearly as relatable as Nani was in the original film. During the scene where Stitch is brought home for the first time by both Lilo and Nani, there's of course the line that Lilo gives Nani about Ohana means family and her trying to say that Stitch should be accepted into their family. But compare how this scene happens in the original to how it happens here in the remake.
What about Ohana?
He hasn't been here that long.
Neither have I. Dad said Ohana means family.
Huh?
Ohana means family. Family means
Nobody gets left behind.
Or
forgotten. I know. I hate it when you use Ohana against me.
Why are you trying to go against what Mama and Papa said?
Because we were left behind. I know. All that stuff sounds so nice. It sounds really nice to me too, but that is not reality. This is reality. And I need you to start living in it with me.
I really don't like how the remake handles it, since it makes Nani just come off as a jerk here. Rather than be frustrated but accepting of Lilo's choice, since A, Ohana does mean family, and also it might be good for Lilo to have a companion, she just decides to be really brash to a child for no reason and tell them to live in reality, which doesn't really make much sense here, not gonna lie. It just makes Nani come off as mean-spirited, which to me, that's not really Nani at all. I personally was really not a fan of how Nani was handled here, and I think the same could really be said for Jumba in this film, cause oh boy, they sure did some stuff to him. I think the most notable thing here, since, as I stated before, Gantu is not in this film, Jumba instead fills the role of the main antagonist. Which, because of this actually kills a lot of the film's pacing, and also some scenes where there were real development in the original. They feel super rushed and watered down in this remake because there's no Gantu to swoop in during the third act. Instead, we have Jumba here throughout the whole film, voiced by Zach Galifianakis, which, despite the fact he is a good actor, I think it was a huge mistake casting him as Jumba. In the original, Jumba is actually a very jovial character, albeit very loony, and has a Russian accent. But here, for some reason, they get rid of his accent, and it's just Zach Galifianakis being Zach Galifianakis. Which, to me, this really isn't Jumba. I think a lot of the charm for Jumba was his Russian accent and the way he would roll over when he laughed and just was kind of a jovial character overall, but none of that is here. So both Nani and Jumba have really been nuked in this remake in my opinion. And also one other very big character that I would very much say was nuked here was Cobra Bubbles. Because for some reason, this film decides to split the character of Cobra Bubbles into two characters. I know, I'm as mind-boggled as you are. So in this film, there's a social worker named Tutu who's actually been seeing Nani for a bit and deciding whether she and Lilo should stay together. So there is still a social worker here checking up on Lilo and Nani just like in the original, but it's not Cobra Bubbles. Which, okay, it's a little weird they removed his character as we know him, but as long as this lady turns out to be a secret CIA agent agent trying to hunt aliens, everything will be fine, right? Nope, because believe it or not, Cobra Bubbles still is in this movie. But instead of being a CIA agent posing as a social worker, he's just a CIA agent who barely goes undercover at all. Like literally the first thing we see him doing is saying he's a CIA agent. This really kills all the appeal with his character in my opinion, because I feel like a lot of the reason people like Cobra Bubbles is because there was a lot of mystery surrounding him. Like sure, he appears as a social worker that does genuinely appear to care for Nani and Lilo and want their best interests in mind, but there is something pretty off about him that you just can't place until the end of the film when it's revealed that he's actually a CIA agent investigating aliens. But all of this is gone in the remake because Cobra Bubbles is basically split into two characters, one who's a female social worker and one who's a CIA agent and also an African American man. Like, would it really have been that hard just to keep that part intact? My theory as to why this is in the film at all is because when this remake was announced, Disney announced that Jolene Purdy would be cast as a child service agent that was going to replace Cobra Bubbles, and her name was going to be Mrs. Kikoa. However, Disney received a lot of backlash for this, which led them to announce that Cobra Bubbles would stay in the film. My assumption is that the script was already finished at this point, so they just shoehorned Cobra Bubbles in as a CIA agent and just kept Mrs. Kikoa in to fill the child services role. I feel like this movie was very rushed through its development overall, which would explain a lot of the weird choices that are happening here. And also, of course, it's a bad, unnecessary live-action remake of an animated movie that is vastly superior. But the character they introduced, which I think is the biggest detriment to this film overall, especially when compared to the original, is a grandma neighbor character who shows up throughout the film as Lilo and Nani's neighbor that's there to take care of them. Why? This grandma neighbor character is actually the one that goes to take Lilo to the pound to get Stitch to begin with. And she also fills a lot of roles that Nani had in the original film in general. Especially when it comes to making Lilo feel comforted during a very turbulent time in her life. For me, this is actually the worst change the film has made overall. Because with a nice grandma neighbor in the film, it really takes away from all the stakes and all the tension that the original film had between Lilo and Nani. In the original film, Lilo and Nani were really left to fend for themselves with their parents gone. And because it was just them in the original film, it left a lot of development between the two of them to try to learn to get along despite the fact they're constantly stressed out at each other for the situation they're in. The stakes and drama also felt a lot more real and a lot more heightened because it was just between the two of them. They had nobody else to rely on in that situation. But when you introduce a nice grandma character who lives next door and is actively doting on them and taking care of them, that just completely erases any stakes. Any of that harsher reality that the original film had is just gone. And again, it's part of the weird trend this film has overall of sanding off the rougher edges of the original and honestly making things seem a lot less realistic, despite the fact this is a live-action movie. Ironic this is supposed to be the realistic version of Lilo and Stitch, but it feels like the least realistic they could have gone with. And also, of note, because of the introduction of this nice grandma character, this film's ending is completely changed from the original. Throughout the course of this film, there's actually a recurring theme of Nani wanting to go to university to study marine biology, but having to stay back to care for Lilo. Obviously, there wasn't any theme of Nani wanting to go to university in the original film. But however, because this is introduced by the film's end, Lilo and Nani actually don't stay together. Nani goes off to study marine biology and Lilo is left behind in the care of Cobra Bubbles and also the nice grandma neighbor. Yes, you heard that right. Somehow, this film, despite repeating the Ohana is family line from the original film, failed to take into account what that actually means. And it decides to split Nani and Lilo up by the end. What even? I think out of all the changes they made in this film, which to be fair, there are a lot of bad changes here, this ending being so vastly different from the original shows so much of what this remake is missing. It feels like they almost didn't even bother watching the original film that they made in order to make this remake. Honestly, this whole film feels like it could have been a Disney Channel production if anything, and that's doing a disservice to some of the better Disney Channel films. But nope, this is a real film that Disney decided to put in theaters and apparently is already planning a sequel to. Oh boy. Overall, I think the biggest issue this remake has is just playing it way too safe and leaning way too much into cuteness as opposed to a lot of the heavier stuff that the original had, which again is why to me it feels like they didn't even watch the original film when they made this remake. Anything that could possibly be too heavy or controversial or actually thought-provoking is totally removed from this remake. It is just a bland, watered down, overly cute mess. And out of all the live action remakes Disney has done at this point, I think this one really stung the most to me personally. As I stated before, Lilo and Stitch is a really important movie to me personally and just one of my favorite movies ever made. But again, also like I said before, it's really unique in being one of the only truly original stories Disney has ever made in regards to their animated stuff. So taking one of the most original films they've ever made with also some of the heaviest stuff they've ever tackled and remaking it in this overly safe, cute package is doing the original film a huge disservice. I've seen a lot of people saying this movie ruins the original Lilo and Stitch, which I actually disagree with that. I think for any of these live action remakes, as bad as a lot of them often are, you can't really say they ruin the originals. Because at the end of the day, the original animated movies, which are the ones you should watch anyway, are all right there and ready for you to enjoy. However, I do dislike that this is the idea of Lilo and Stitch that today's kids are probably gonna grow up with. Given the fact that a sequel is already on the way, it feels like Disney wants to capitalize on the fact they were able to make an entire franchise off of Lilo and Stitch in the 2000s. And if this remake is successful, you can count on them to try to do the same thing in the 2020s for today's kids, just with none of the nuance of the original. Fortunately, I did not pay directly for this movie because I paid to see Friendship from A24, then just walked into this film. So my local theater still got my money anyway. And I was able to sit down and review this movie for y'all even though it was extremely painful to sit through. Obviously the Lilo and Stitch franchise in the 2000s had its ups and downs as well, with some of the sequels not being nearly as good as the original, obviously. But honestly, I take any of the Stitch products made in the 2000s over this remake, cause a good chunk of them still do capture the spirit of the original film, although obviously not with as much nuance. But still way more than this live action remake had, that's for sure. It sucks that today's kids are gonna grow up with this image of Stitch in their mind instead of the more complex original film. I can only hope that this film ends up flopping at the box office, but only time will tell. I guess we'll see. All I can do is personally advise you to not give your money to this like I didn't. Cause believe me, this really ain't worth it. I'm really glad I didn't pay for it. But what do you think? Am I wrong? Is the live action Lilo and Stitch a masterpiece? And what do you think of the original Lilo and Stitch if you've seen it? Let me know down in the comments below. Special thanks to my patrons DDC1996 and Trayvon Gibson for supporting me on Patreon, and thanks Balf Games for being a YouTube member. Special thanks to my Discord server boosters Drew Raposa, Lophius Dragon, Xenia Games, and Battle Mage Azulio for supporting me that way too. If you enjoyed this video personally, be sure to subscribe and also like the video. I do videos all about film pretty much always anyway, so if you enjoyed this video, you'll probably like the other ones I have planned as well. You can also join my Discord to suggest topics for me to cover here on YouTube there in our suggestions and questions channel. If you're curious to see what I've already reviewed, you can also check out my letterbox, which is linked down below as well. That's where I review movies and shows, oftentimes movies and shows I won't cover here on YouTube. But regardless, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I've been Otterly Noah, and I'll see you on the Otter side. Bye!